All right, welcome to this explainer. Let's just dive straight in because today we're tackling one of the absolute most frustrating things in photography, trying to balance a wildly bright sky with a subject completely stuck in the shadows. We're going to crack open the photographer's toolkit and figure out exactly how to beat this. I mean, be honest, we've all been there, right? Have you ever completely ruined a stunning landscape or a great portrait just because the sky decided to turn into this giant, distracting block of blown out white? It's literally the worst. You're standing there looking with your own two eyes at brilliant blue skies and a perfectly lit subject. But your camera, it just forces you to choose between the two. So what's actually happening here? The core conflict is really just a classic tug of war. You've got drastically different exposure levels fighting for space inside the exact same frame. On one side, you have the brightest part of your scene, which is usually the sky. If you expose for your subject, boom, the sky is horribly overexposed. But if you adjust to capture those gorgeous cloud details, your main subject instantly drops into deep, murky shadow. Our human eyes balance this extreme contrast effortlessly, but a camera sensor, it definitely struggles. So, how do we bridge the gap? Well, let's start with our first set of tools, in-camera exposure tactics. Here is the absolutely crucial rule of thumb. In high contrast situations, you always want to prioritize exposing for your highlights. Think of it this way. Digital sensors hold on to way more recoverable data in the shadows than they do in the highlights. Once a highlight is clipped, meaning it hits pure white, that data is literally gone forever. You cannot pull it back in post-production. It's just blank space. So how do we actually protect those highlights? By switching your camera to spot metering mode, you can measure the exposure specifically for the absolute brightest part of that sky to make sure nothing clips. Now, quick warning, doing this means your main subject is going to look pretty dark, maybe even like a total silhouette on your preview screen. And you know what? That is completely okay. It feels wrong, but you're intentionally capturing an underexposed subject because you know you have the data locked in to fix it later. Okay, so that's the in-camera baseline. Let's move on to our second approach, modifying light on location. If you really want to equalize a scene practically, enter the graduated neutral density or ND filter. This thing is basically magic glass. It physically reduces the brightness of the sky rushing into your lens, but without darkening the lower half of your frame. It's a clever little tool that's dark at the top and smoothly fades down to completely clear at the bottom. It's super simple to use too. You just align the transition line of the filter right up with your horizon. By doing that, you're essentially compressing the dynamic range of the whole scene right there at the lens level. You're physically forcing the exposure to be equal before the light even hits the sensor, which lets your camera comfortably grab the sky and the ground evenly, all in one single shot. But hey, what if you can't darken the sky? Well, then you lift the foreground. Grab a simple reflector to bounce some natural sunlight back or fire off a fill flash. You're just adding a kiss of light to your subject to match the bright ambient exposure of the sky behind them. Instead of dimming the sun, you're actively reducing that harsh contrast by physically bringing up the light levels in the shadows yourself. All right, let's pivot to section 3. What happens when physical tools just aren't cutting it? It is time for HDR and post-processing. When a single exposure is a lost cause, high dynamic range or HDR bracketing is your best friend. This technique lets your camera capture the entire spectrum of light by taking multiple exposures. Instead of forcing you to choose between the brights and the darks, you just capture every single level of light present in the scene. Have your cake and eat it too, basically. Let's break down the bracketing workflow. First, get your camera perfectly still on a tripod. Step 1, take a photo perfectly exposed for that bright sky. Step 2, take another one, this time exposed for your dark subject. Step 3, take a standard middle-of-the-road exposure right in between. And finally, step 4, you take those 3 files into your editing software. The software does the heavy lifting, mathematically blending them together, cherry-picking only the perfectly exposed parts from each frame to build one absolutely flawless image. Now listen closely. None of these shadow recovery tricks work if you aren't shooting in RAW. Leveraging the massive amount of uncompressed data in a RAW file is the secret sauce. It's what gives you the latitude to push those deep shadows around without the image just completely falling apart into a noisy mess. If you try aggressively recovering shadows on a compressed JPEG, it's going to look terrible. With RAW, you've got the exact data you need. Because you purposely exposed for the sky in camera, your clouds and bright blues are totally locked in and perfectly preserved. So when you open up that RAW file, you literally just grab the shadow slider and pull it up to digitally brighten the dark spots. I gotta tell you, it's incredibly satisfying watching your subject brighten up beautifully and cleanly on your monitor, all without blowing out those precious highlights you worked so hard to protect out in the field. And finally, let's wrap things up with Section 4, some essential environmental tips to consider before you even take the lens cap off. Look, it is definitely worth noting that modern high dynamic range sensors are just incredibly forgiving compared to cameras from even a decade ago. They give you so much more leeway right out of the box. But honestly, nature's absolute best filter is still the golden hour, shooting right after sunrise or just before sunset. The sunlight is traveling through way more of the Earth's atmosphere, which diffuses the light and naturally drops all that harsh contrast for you. Work smarter, not harder. So we've unpacked the toolkit. From spot metering and graduated ND filters to bouncing light, HDR bracketing, and just letting the golden hour do the work. Which of these fits your personal workflow best? And honestly, as computational photography and AI in our smartphones continue to instantly and perfectly blend exposures for us, you kind of have to wonder, how much longer will traditional photographers even need to rely on physical filters and manual bracketing at all? Definitely something to think about on your next shoot. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.